Two left lanes are shut, southbound, free to fall towards Camberley for emergency resurfacing repairs. West London, the A5 Edgware Road shut just north of the Marylebone flyover for a police investigation, causing long queues on surrounding routes, and Edgware Road station remains closed on the Bakerloo line. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
It's the Great British Summer Giveaway, and have we got a prize for you? There's a totally tax-free £15,000 in cash to make your summer spectacular. Spend that extra cash however you like. You'll also win a brand new iPhone, Apple AirPods, and if that wasn't enough, a £500 voucher to spend at your favourite UK attraction, so you can enjoy amazing days out this year. For a chance to win the iPhone, treats, and £15,000 cash, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or post your name and number to GB06 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 28th of June. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threats on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me.
My guest and I tackle the issues that really matter, with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country. That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's election channel.
And when the big stories break, we're tackling them on Britain's newsroom. When we disagree, and we disagree a lot, it's even livelier than normal.
We don't disagree that much.
We do.
His comedy, though, is revolting. I knew her, and unlike you. That explains Beverly Turner's temperament.
It's a bit frosty in here, isn't it?
He'll have one of me one day.
For dartball practice.
Britain's newsroom on GB News. Weekdays, 9:30 a.m.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening and welcome to Vote 2024, The People Decide, with me, Camilla Tominey. Coming up on tonight's show, we're going to be reflecting, of course, on the TV debate between Sunak and Starmer, particularly those comments on private healthcare and the tax row. We'll also be crossing over to Ellie Costello in Normandy to give us the latest on the D-Day commemorations, which today featured a very heartfelt speech by the King. And we'll be reflecting on that no-confidence vote in Welsh First Minister Vaughan Gething. But first, here's the news with Polly Middlehurst. Camilla, thank you. Well, good evening to you. And yes, in Wales, Vaughan Gething admits it was a very difficult afternoon for him in the Senate after losing a vote of no confidence in the Welsh Parliament. But he insists he will be staying on as First Minister. The Conservatives brought the motion against him after a series of rows, including a controversial donation, the sacking of a minister and the collapse of a cooperation deal with Plaid Cymru. Mr Gething, who's only been in post since March, has promised he will continue to put Wales first.
Today was an exercise in muck-throwing. The range of different things that were said that members know are simply not true is really quite disgraceful. I'm going tonight to Normandy. I should have been in Portsmouth today honouring our D-Day veterans. I will go to Normandy to do my duty for my country, as any First Minister should. That means a long drive overnight to arrive to do the right thing tomorrow. That's how I feel about serving my country, and that's my intention now and for the future.
Vaughan Gething. Well, His Majesty the King has said the UK is eternally indebted to those who fought and lost their lives on D-Day. Events have been taking place in France and in Portsmouth, where 80 years ago, 150,000 men set off for the largest seaborne invasion in history. Hundreds of personnel parachuted into Normandy in France to remember those who did the same 8 decades ago. Speaking a short time ago, His Majesty paid tribute to veterans, saying their stories could not fail to inspire the nation.
Let us once again commit ourselves always to remember, cherish and honour those who served that day and to live up to the freedom they died for by balancing rights with civic responsibilities to our country. For we are all eternally in their debt.
His Majesty the King. Well, let's bring you up to date now with the latest election news. And Sir Keir Starmer has called the Prime Minister a liar over claims that a Labour government would push up taxes by £2,000 over 4 years. The pair are clashing over alleged black holes in financial plans, but until manifestos are published, the numbers aren't clear. Rishi Sunak claims independent officials came up with the figure, but the Labour leader says it's all a lie.
What you saw last night was a Prime Minister with his back against the wall, desperately trying to defend 14 years of failure, resorting, and it was a flash of his character, an insight into his character, to lies. I don't say that lightly. To lies about Labour's plans, about health waiting lists, about, the tax, lies from the Prime Minister.
The Liberal Democrats weren't part of the televised debate last night, but on the campaign trail today, Sir Ed Davey's been calling for regular mental health MOTs. It comes as he was forced to apologise for a speeding offence after he was caught doing 73 miles an hour in a 60 zone on the M1. He says he quite rightly paid a fine, had 3 points added to his licence as a result. And a Russian cybercrime group known as Killin is behind a ransomware attack crippling major London hospitals, we're told. The attack has led to a severe reduction in services, impacting tests and blood transfusions. Critical incidents were declared at King's College Hospital, Guy's and St Thomas's, including the Royal Brompton and other primary care services yesterday. The government says patient safety is their top priority, with NHS officials now working to restore services. That's the news. For the latest stories, do sign up to GB News Alerts. Scan the QR code on your screen right now or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Welcome back. Let's get stuck into the TV debate, because there was quite the moment where Julie Etchingham for ITV asked both leaders whether they would use private healthcare. Let's have a listen to that.
A quick point of information to both of you. If you had loved ones on a long waiting list for surgery, would you, if you felt that that was the only way forward, use private healthcare? Rishi Sunak?
Yes.
Keir Starmer?
No.
Absolutely no if your loved one was on a waiting list for surgery?
No.
Thank you very much.
I don't use private health.
Okay.
I use the NHS. That's where my wife works.
So that's an interesting aspect of the debate. There are other interesting aspects, not least on tax, which we're going to discuss in a bit, whether or not each party would stay in the ECHR and all the rest of it. But overall, if you reflect on what happened almost 24 hours ago, who do you think won? Who impressed you the most? Who do you think had the best result in that first TV debate, first of many, I must add? Do let us know. Get your views in at gbnews.com/your say. Now, joining me to discuss last night's debate and everything that's happened subsequently is GB News political editor Christopher Hope. Chris, we've just seen you on a battle bus and now you're in the studio. Can I just applaud you on an astonishing innings in this election so far, buddy?
I'm here to serve GB News viewers, Camilla.
Here to serve is exactly the motto. So, look, you spoke to Keir Starmer earlier about this very issue.
Yes, I was lucky enough to be in the spin room. We were in a different postcode to where that happened. The journalists kept well away from where that debate happened, up in Salford, in Granada TV Land, home of Coronation Street. We got a bus down all the way down England today and ended up in Portsmouth, where Sir Keir Starmer was there doing the D-Day commemorations, and he met a veteran, and then he was asked some questions, and in a line, everyone asked about the tax number. That's not great for Labour because they're trying to change the subject in a minute. But I asked a different question. I was struck by the clip you played there. Is it really right that if a loved one is very, very ill, you wouldn't pay for private healthcare if you could afford it? Here's what he had to say.
I grew up with my mum suffering. She was extremely ill. She nearly died several times. and she was treated on every occasion by the NHS on an urgent basis. I have 100% confidence in the NHS, and that is why I wouldn't use anything other than the NHS, and I wouldn't for my relatives. But this is a lived experience for me, because as I was growing up, particularly when I was a teenager, I was in the high dependency unit with my mum, and we nearly lost her a number of times, but she was absolutely clear that it was the NHS that pulled her through every time. I say thank you to them, and I would use them.
And when you were DPP, did you have it then? Private healthcare?
No, I didn't.
That's it. So when he was DPP, Director of Public Prosecutions, with his own pension plan set up in an Act of Parliament, he didn't also use private healthcare even then. So he's got in him. He did care for his mother, who was very ill.
Yeah, of course, we appreciate that.
He's got
nobody. But
yeah.
I don't quite get this. Margaret Thatcher back in the day was asked about this. She gave a really clever response, which was, "I pay my taxes and my national insurance contributions so that the NHS can treat the people it needs to treat. I can afford private care. I take it, A, because I want to get in and out very quickly, because, by the way, I only sleep for 4 hours a night, and B, so that I can free up the NHS for those who can't afford private care." I don't understand. We've now got some shame attached to private care, even though Wes Streeting, the man that wants to be the next health secretary, is saying, "I tell you how we bring down the NHS waiting list. We get the private sector to carry some of the burden."
Well, I asked John Ashworth that same question last night about that, because that's what I thought. Well, that makes no sense, because you want to use the private sector to clear the backlog, but you won't use it yourself. They're saying, well, that's the NHS buying in services to clear backlog. It's different to not choosing to use the NHS and almost choosing to jump the queue with some private healthcare. But it's what most people do. If you can afford it and someone in your family is suffering, most people would spend the money.
God forbid,
he wouldn't.
If a child was suffering, he's really saying that he's going to put tribal ideology ahead of care for a child. Is it tribal?
Is it just he's got he relied on the NHS? He loves it in the family. It looked after his mum. I mean,
I love the NHS. My dad was a GP in the NHS. By the way, whisper it, Chris. Most doctors have private health cover too.
As do council bosses. I mean,
I know most employees at kind of blue chip companies. Let's quickly talk about the tax row, because basically, in summary, what happened was he landed this point, didn't he, Rishi Sunak, in the debate, saying Labour's going to put £2,000 on your tax bills. And this was predicated, I understand, by Jonathan Ashworth running around with a 12-page dossier talking about a £28 billion black hole in the Tories' finances, and the Tories running around with their own dossier saying
there was a
38.5 billion black hole in the Labour finances. Is this £2,000 figure a lie?
Well, certainly that's what the Labour's been saying today. Now, of course, yesterday in the debate, Sir Keir Starmer waited nearly half an hour to make that point.
Yes. Did he have a little pep talk in the break? You do need to rebut that figure.
I think it was before the debate. They had a letter in their back pocket, Labour, didn't they? A letter from James Bowler, who's the Permanent Secretary of the Treasury, saying that you can't say it's a government-produced document. So Rishi Sunak did make a bit of a slight boo-boo by saying it's prepared by independent experts, by civil servants. We have gone through the detail today. The Tory party has helped us do that today, so where their number comes from, looking at the workings. 21 out of 27 of their lines of data come from official Treasury costings. Others have internal costings, one from a Labour Party, one from an independent party, and so it goes on. It does appear to stack together, and in fact the Tory party did make clear that they said, well, here's the number. We chose the middle number, not the top number or the bottom number, but the middle number on these.
So they didn't go too generous or too...
It could be billions more, is their point.
Fraser Nelson of The Spectator has written this piece suggesting that when he's looked at the Tories' own costings, that would add £3,000 to tax bills over the course of the next Parliament if they win. I mean, I'm going to put that
and perhaps that's what Labour should be saying, rather than fighting on a number...
He's a liar,
than fighting on a number like they don't own. Like today, literally all the journalists asked the same question of Keir Starmer. It was frustrating, I think, for him. It's not where they want to be.
But that's also... Are people going to be delving into the detail of who said what to the Treasury and which civil servants were involved? All they're going to remember in their minds it's Labour's going to tax me more, possibly. I'm going to be discussing this further with James Price, who's a former special advisor, worked in and around Number 10 for a long time. So let's see how he spins it, Chris. But you need to take a lie down in a darkened room, maybe get that suit dry cleaned, if you don't mind me saying, Christoph, because you obviously have been sort of eating sandwiches on the go. Much
Leave me alone, Camilla Tominey.
I know what the campaign trail's like, mate. I've been on it. Christopher Hope, thank you very much. You have a rest until tomorrow. Well, let's have a chat to a doctor now about Keir Starmer's positioning, because I think it'd be really interesting to find out what somebody working in the NHS thinks of the Labour leader's claims. Dr Tolu joins me now. What do you reckon then, Doctor? I mean, on one hand, we're quite thankful, aren't we, in the NHS for people who get private health... no, it's not there. I'm hearing in my ear he's not there. Chopper, sorry, another couple of minutes work is needed from you. I mean, on the whole issue of the NHS, I probably think that on the whole, Starmer probably landed his points better. Don't you think he came across in that debate as a bit more human?
Yes, and when you had that woman saying she batch cooks at weekends to use cheaper power, that was... I found it really
That was
affecting.
really powerful.
Very powerful, and I think the way she responded to that, Keir Starmer responded to that, was deeply affecting. That was someone who spoke at her level and understood what she meant.
The good doctor is with us now. Let's see if we can get a prescription on GB News, an answer. Dr Tolu, lovely to see you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening. You'll have seen this debate play out today, Doctor, about, you know, whether I suppose it's morally right for a Labour leader to use private healthcare in an emergency. What's your response to what Keir Starmer said last night?
I mean, I do understand where he's coming from, but I also understand that there is a really long waiting list. The problem with that is when people that can't afford private healthcare do not choose to use private healthcare, that unfortunately elongates the waiting list. I mean,
yes,
I do get where he's coming from, but if you can afford it, then you should definitely use it because it relieves the burden on the NHS.
So the general kind, I mean, I know you can't speak for all doctors in the NHS, but is the general, I mean, do doctors in the NHS and nurses look down on people that use private healthcare, or are they quite grateful because, as you say, it does ease the load?
I mean, we definitely don't look down on people who use private healthcare. I mean, if you can afford to use private healthcare, if it's paid for by the company, if there are other means for you to get care, then of course, we do appreciate, we want people to appreciate the NHS, and obviously the NHS is for people who have no other means, who can't get care anywhere else. So we definitely don't look down on people who use private healthcare. If anything, it relieves a burden on the NHS.
Doctor, what's the biggest challenge you face on the wards right now? We know about these chronically high waiting lists. We know about staff shortages. On a day-to-day basis, what's the biggest pressure on you?
I mean, it's definitely just the time that you need to get things done in, and it's definitely the staff and the manpower. Unfortunately, in the NHS at present, you're expected to do the job of 2-3 people. Just the funding unfortunately isn't there. And that's probably the biggest thing at the moment because, as one person, you can only do so much.
And if you could become Prime Minister tomorrow or indeed on July the 4th, what's the one first change you would make to make your life better and that of other doctors and nurses working on the front line?
Well, considering that the doctors are currently striking and obviously nurses went on a strike a while ago, I mean, I would definitely increase the rate of pay. Because at this point in time, you want to feel valued, you want to feel that, you're actually getting paid for the work that you're doing. That would definitely, obviously I'm completely biased, but that would definitely be the first thing that I do.
Yeah, you want to have that pay deal. 35%, or do you think there should be some compromise, very briefly?
Oh, that's a tough question to answer. I mean, as you can imagine, obviously as a doctor, I want the 35%, but realistically, I feel like obviously both sides have tried to come to the table to figure out a deal. More so the doctors than unfortunately the government.
All right, Dr Tolu, thank you very much for your time and also for all your work you do for the NHS along with your colleagues. Thank you. Well, coming up next, as I say, we're going to have a further chat about this tax row. Who do we believe? Do you think your taxes will go up under Labour, under the Conservatives, or maybe both? Stay tuned for that.
Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m, followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain, followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
In places like News Corp, right, that an organisation I know reasonably well, when that poor guy died in America,
George Floyd, you're talking about?
Yes, they had a 9-minute silence for him, right, a more absurd and ridiculous idea I'd never come across in my life. How do you feel about 9 minutes for George Floyd?
Well, of course, that's the length of time that he was strangled
No,
by a police
I know why it
officer.
was, but how do you feel about that?
Well, I think a lot of the black staff in particular in News Corp probably appreciated the fact that it was taking a stand. And if you look at businesses...
Why do they need to take a stand about what the police do in the United States?
Okay, well, what about the guy... What about the jeweller tonight who has died in Richmond in Surrey when two, how should we put them, hoodlums of colour actually had a chokehold? He went home and he killed himself. There are lots of things going on in our world, as you well know, which are very upsetting. Okay. And if we're going to stop every time that somebody dies in unfortunate circumstances, we'll never get any work done.
Well, Stella, a final word to you.
I think sometimes, yes, equality and diversity can be a waste of money when it goes to things that are not necessary for the function of the organisation. But when just last year you had Birmingham Council being pushed into bankruptcy because they were found out to not have given women equal wages,
No,
then
because they paid bin men more than they paid cooks.
But then you can see Ben's point that if they had someone who was looking appropriately in equality and diversity and the actual practical policy implications of what they were doing, then maybe you wouldn't have this situation. You wouldn't have this legal liability. That's what Ben is saying. This is a multi-million pounds organisation. Like, it needs to have someone looking seriously and taking responsibility for these decisions.
The People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Akweer, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
It's true.
You're not wrong. No one will be cancelled.
Lovely. Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Vote 2024 with me, Camilla Tominey. I wanted to get your reaction to last night's TV debate on ITV and find out who you thought won or lost. Steve wasn't impressed, I think it's fair to say that. He just simply replies, both losers. All right, Steve? Must try harder. Dawn says, Starmer lost to Sunak, pretty hard to do. To be fair, I share that view, Dawn. And do you know what my 13-year-old son said? He was watching, he said, good God, the other bloke's starting to make Rishi Sunak look quite cool. I thought, that's an achievement. Dave says, I don't believe Sunak about the tax increase. Interesting, he's not convinced. Robert says, the advert breaks were more informative than Starmer and Sunak. Slightly harsh. Right, shall we catch up on this tax row? This is the clip from the debate where Rishi Sunak accused Labour of putting up people's tax bills.
Inflation is back to normal, wages are growing, taxes are now being cut. Keir Starmer would put all that progress at risk. He would put up everyone's taxes by £2,000. £2,000 in higher taxes for every working family in our country. After all the hard work and sacrifice we've been through, that's not the right course of action. I don't know why you want to put up people's taxes.
And this was the response from Rachel Reeves today, the woman wanting to be the next Chancellor.
Well, the letter from the Permanent Secretary of the Treasury confirms what Labour have said last night. The Prime Minister lied in the debate last night. Labour has no plans to increase taxes on working people. In fact, I have ruled out increases in income tax, national insurance and VAT for the duration of the next Parliament.
Well, to drill into the detail of this, and believe you me, I need someone, because as a journalist, I'm obviously functionally enumerate. I can't count. So we are counting on James Price, who's in the studio. He's a former Treasury Special Advisor and Director of Government Relations at the Adam Smith Institute. James, do the sums, do the math for us, please. Is there truth to the claim that Labour will put on £2,000 on people's tax bills?
So, you know the old saying that there are lies, damn lies, and statistics?
Yes.
And numbers can be made not just to dance before our eyes on spreadsheets, but they can be made to do all kinds of magic and alchemy, especially in election campaigns. I think this is a row, on the politics first, this is a row that the Conservatives and the government will be very happy to have.
Yes.
Because it's got people focused on, well, just how much will Labour put my taxes up by? And it's slightly reminiscent of that £350 million a year going to the EU that we had back in the Brexit campaign.
But don't mention that, because the Remainers will start kind of, getting very overexcited. But yeah, I see what you mean. It's kind of like, in a way, if he's just landed, and I think he said it 11 times or 16 times in the debate, Labour will put £2,000 on your tax bill. Are that many people going to be drilling into the detail? They'll just take that away from the debate and they're done.
That's right. And £2,000 is an interest, again, just on the politics and just on the what they call the optics of this. It's a number that people can understand, right? It's quite a lot of money, right? It's probably what a lot of people take home in a month after all the taxes and all the rest of it. And when you start talking about millions of pounds, let alone billions of pounds, let alone trillions of pounds, which, by the way, the country owes in terms of the overall net debt, we can't understand what that means. Well, what does £1 trillion get you? How many aircraft carriers? But £2,000, people have got a pretty decent idea of actually what that feels like. Where am I going to find another £2,000 from? And if Labour say, well, it's not going to be that, well, right, where am I going to get another 1,500 quid from?
Also, he got an admission from Starmer, although they now are vehemently denying this and saying it's lies and putting out all sorts of social media posts sort of casting Rishi Sunak in the sin bin. They have said, and he did say in that debate, well, look, some taxes will go up under me. And he didn't deny the whole taxing of the pensions triple lock. Having said that, this is clever spin from the Conservatives, because let's be honest, where else is tax going to go? They keep on saying it's going to come down. Fraser Nelson on The Spectator has done his own number crunching. He's come up with the idea that actually the Tories will end up costing people £3,000 more if they get back into power for the next 4 to 5 years. I love this row between two people that seem to advocate high taxes anyway.
Right, and who ends up being the loser of higher taxes? It's families, it's individuals, it's businesses. So here's, I think, the useful thing for viewers to have as a take-home. When you look at how much a tax rise or a tax cut brings in or costs, it doesn't cost the government stuff. It's just not as much money as they're getting in from, again, individuals and families and businesses. You look at the initial thing, OK, so I'm going to raise taxes by 100 quid. That means the government has another 100 quid to spend. But then that's £100 that isn't going to go on hiring somebody else, isn't going to go on investing in either a bridge or a new bit of road or something exciting like some bit of artificial intelligence or some cool robotics or whatever else. It's money that can't do those other things. And then that costs money down the line and it stops the economy from growing. And that is the kind of what we call an opportunity cost in there. And so that's the bit that never, ever happens. You always talk about, well, I'm going to raise this much money. And so one of the Labour potential tax rises is taking VAT and putting it on to private school fees or independent school fees. And that is, again, well, we're going to raise this much money. Well, not if all the private schools end up shutting down. And you've got to then go and send people off into the education system. And again, that point that we used to just before the break about Starmer saying he'd never use private healthcare. Well, that just means more money that's then going to have to be spent in the NHS for people who otherwise, if they could afford the private healthcare. Right? And this is the bit where people get messed up with all these
But
things.
also, I mean, we're looking forward to the manifestos, which I think are coming in about a week to 10 days' time. Great. And that word, it appeared on the Telegraph's debate bingo sheet, fully costed. Everything's fully costed. I mean, I'm trying to calculate, because I think the windfall tax seems to have been spent several times over by Labour making different pledges. But at the end of the day, if you're going to... It's the same for both sides, by the way. We've got Rishi Sunak, money to defence. He's got to deal with the infected blood compensation. There's also a massive bill for the post office victims, possibly a potential Thames Water bailout. So, put all that to one side and ask yourself, well, how are you going to raise the money for that? And carry on with this kind of, well, what has been a historically big spending Tory government. And equally with Labour. I mean, where's the money coming from for Great British Energy and all the rest of it? It's got to come from the taxpayer. It's always the taxpayer, isn't it, James?
Right. Well, as the great lady once said, there's no such thing as government money. There's only taxpayers' money.
Indeed so.
Right?
I love that we've quoted the Iron Lady twice on one show.
Actually, that's quite a low number for me.
It's quite a low number for GBNews, I'd imagine. James, finally, who did you think, try and not be partisan, who do you think won that debate?
No, I mean, I think Sunak obviously won because he's across the detail and Starmer's just trying not to say anything. And I think the fundamental point is, will Starmer put up people's taxes? Yeah, of course he will. right?
Yes,
And
but then
that's the
can
take home
people
that
be
matters.
confident that the Tories won't either?
No,
I
well,
mean, taxes have
quite.
gone up, spending has gone up, and immigration has gone up under the Tories.
So the last part I said, that this idea of a static model versus a dynamic model, it's not just about the tax rise, but what else you do in the economy. Can we get growth going again? Can we get more businesses investing here? Can we get all these other wonderful things that capitalism brings to the economy going? Or are we going to be just cutting up the pie in different ways?
Yes.
That's the question. Which party will create more prosperity and more growth? That's what will actually help us out of these problems.
James Price, thank you very much indeed. And I think you're joining me on my Sunday show, so I look forward to seeing you then
Cannot wait.
reviewing the papers. Well, let's have a look at the polling, because it's been doing some quite interesting things since Nigel Farage entered the political fray. I should say re-entered the political fray. To discuss this, Professor Sir John Curtis, pollster and Professor of Politics at the University of Strathclyde, joins me. Prof, we've got a poll from YouGov suggesting that Reform are now just 2 points behind the Tories, which is interesting because I had Mr Farage on the show earlier this week and he was bragging and boasting that he felt he would overtake the Tories in a week's time. Is that a viable prospect?
Well, I think the first thing to say, Claire, is that, this is the first poll to be conducted since Nigel Farage's entry into the race. And in the end, we'll want to see what is the evidence of a number of polls. But it does show something like a 2 to a 3 point swing from Conservative Reform, from a pollster which, hitherto at least, has already tended to have Reform relatively high, and the Conservatives somewhat on the low side. Now, it's to make things more complicated, it's now done some methodological changes, which makes a bit of difference to that. I think, to be honest, that kind of movement is consistent with what we knew from hypothetical polling that said, well, what would happen? What would you do if Nigel Farage were to become leader of the Reform Party? The most recent estimate said, well, it might add 2 or 3 points to Reform's vote. Now, we can't necessarily assume from that Nigel Farage's entry means that Reform are going to carry on increasing. But what it does, if other polling confirms that there maybe a couple of points added on to Reform, is that the Conservative task of squeezing the Reform vote, which is utterly essential to the Conservatives' chances of being able to narrow Labour's lead, that task would have got more difficult. And the question may not necessarily be, does Nigel Farage overtake the Conservative Party? That, for the moment at least, is an interesting question, but not as yet a obvious prospect. But whether or not Reform are now going to get a sufficient share of the vote, that some of those other polling numbers recently that suggest the Conservatives could be somewhere between 100 and 140 seats, those numbers may indeed be more likely to transpire on polling day if Reform do indeed remain at the kinds of levels that they've been in this campaign so far.
Professor, we know that obviously the polls are going to shift between now and July the 4th.
No, we don't. No, we don't. No, there's absolutely no guarantee of that at all. No.
Ah, OK. So what kind of events make them shift? Because obviously we've seen the TV debate last night. Is it too early to tell whether that's had any impact? When might we find out whether that's had a positive effect on either candidate, for instance?
Yeah, well, it's too early to tell because we've not had anybody do any polling of the vote intention kind, as opposed to some snap polls of people who were watching the programme, which of course is actually a minority of the polling. It was only around 4 million people who were actually watching the programme. And of course, unfortunately, it will now be rather difficult to disentangle the effect of Nigel Farage's entry from the effect of the leaders' debate. I mean, only one leaders' debate has ever really made a difference, and that was the very first one back in 2010 when Nick Clegg did very well, although by polling day, all that effect had disappeared. The truth is, something dramatic has got to happen. The problem the Conservative Party faces is that there are just some big, big clouds hanging over it, which the public don't seem to be willing to allow to be blown away. The first is, above all, the economy. The fact that the economy has done relatively badly during this parliament, not, of course, entirely the Conservatives' fault in reality, but something for which they are very easily blamed because of the Liz Truss fiscal event. And the second thing is the size of the waiting lists of the NHS. And I think the honest truth is the Conservatives spent much of the last 6 months focusing on tax cuts and on immigration, which the polling evidence suggests were never likely to rescue the Conservative position. What the Conservative Party has to do, it has to get those waiting times down. And frankly, in an election campaign, that's impossible. And they also needed to be able to spend more time improving the economy. But Rishi Sunak decided to cut and run the moment there seemed to be the odd green shoot. But that probably isn't enough for the electorate.
Professor Sir John Curtis, thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening. No doubt we will speak again as the weeks commence. Indeed, thank you very much indeed. What I can never understand is that gulf between some of the polling suggesting that Labour's 12 points ahead and some that's suggesting that they're 27. And one of the psephologists said to me it was often to do with whether they factor in don't knows or not. But still, there's a lot to play for. We'll be covering every coffin spit, as you can imagine, from battle buses all over the country on GB News, so do stay tuned throughout the election process. But coming up next, we're going to be talking about D-Day, that commemoration which is going to be in earnest tomorrow in Normandy, started today in Portsmouth with some absolutely remarkable scenes involving the King, the Queen, the Prince of Wales and indeed 500 veterans. Stay tuned.
Hello, welcome to your latest GB News weather update from the Met Office. Tomorrow's going to be another fairly cool day across the northwest with a risk of some further heavy showers, and we could see some further heavy showers this evening with a northwesterly wind pushing showers into similar areas. It's northwestern Scotland where we're going to see the highest rainfall totals. Through the next 24 hours or so, we could see a mix of hail, possibly some hill snow in there as well. We could also see some showers as far south as southwestern England overnight tonight. Many western areas seeing a bit more in the way of cloud tonight compared to last night. So it will be a bit of a milder night for some of us, but I think still where skies stay the clearest, there's a risk of a rural grass frost. So potentially another chilly start for some areas, particularly across eastern Scotland, where it will be a bright start to the day, plenty of early sunshine. But notice we've got some bright colours on those showers, showing the heaviness of them through tomorrow morning. We could see some spray on the roads because of that across western areas of Scotland, in towards northwestern England as well as parts of Wales. The Midlands as well, potentially seeing some fairly heavy showers, but most of us getting away with a dry and bright start despite the chillier feel to things at the moment. So another fairly cool day to come tomorrow, especially for the time of year, and if you are further north and west, where it will be another showery day. There's another risk of thunderstorms, potentially some hail as well in those showers, especially as we head in towards Thursday evening here. Elsewhere across Wales, central areas of England and across the south coast in particular, they still feel fairly pleasant in the sunshine, highs of 18, possibly 19 degrees, so that's not too bad for the time of year. Now into Friday, we start to see a band of more persistent rain push across the UK, so that will bring a greater risk of some showery outbreaks of rain a bit more widely across the UK. So a bit more in the way of cloud, and it will still be another fairly cool day. But looking ahead to the weekend, it does look like there's been more in the way of sunshine more widely across the country, and temperatures returning to the low 20s for some of us.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect, and then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's election channel.
And when the big stories break, we're tackling them on Britain's newsroom. When we disagree, and we disagree a lot, it's even livelier than normal.
We don't disagree that much.
We do. His comedy, though, is revolting. I knew her, and unlike you. That explains Beverly Turner's temperament.
It's a bit frosty in here, isn't it?
He'll have one of me one day.
For dartball practice. Britain's newsroom on GB News. Weekdays, 9:30 a.m.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Let's reflect on the D-Day memorial that took place in Portsmouth earlier today. This two-day commemorations are broken into two halves, really. We've had the Portsmouth side of things, because that's, of course, the port city and naval base where ships were launched from. And then the commemorations this evening are moving to Normandy. But one particularly heartfelt aspect of today's events was, of course, the King's speech.
Let us once again commit ourselves always to remember, cherish and honour those who served that day, and to live up to the freedom they died for by balancing rights with civic responsibilities to our country. For we are all eternally in their debt.
Well, our brilliant GB News presenter, Ellie Costello, is in Normandy. And Ellie, I know a lot is taking place tonight. I can hear the crowds in the background there. And of course, there's a very poignant ceremony that's happening tomorrow morning at 7:25, which is the day, the hour, the minute of the day where those brave soldiers landed on the beaches.
Yes, Camilla, that is tomorrow, D-Day, the 6th of June, 80 years tomorrow from the 6th of June, 1944, and everybody knows about what happened on D-Day, those 150,000 Allied troops that stormed those beaches so very bravely in Normandy. But what many people don't know, Camilla, is that D-Day operation actually started here on this very bridge just after midnight on the 6th of June 1944, and it started with the British. Airborne troops landed in that field just over there. They knew that this bridge was of strategic importance and there was no point launching an invasion on the coastline if the Germans could simply cross this bridge and meet the Allied troops on the coast. So they knew they had to take this bridge and one just shortly down the river. So British troops landed in that field. They took this bridge from the Germans and they headed over here to the first building off this bridge. It's called Café Gondry. It was owned by two people at the time, Georges and Therese, and their two daughters, and they were terrified at the sounds of these troops that had landed in the fields opposite their house, and they scurried down into their basement and they were hiding behind the barrels in the basement. They thought that the Germans had come for them, but in fact, two British soldiers made their way into that house and said, "Monsieur, we are British, we are here to save you." And that family did describe being hugged and kissed, and they were kissing the British. They were so pleased to see them. It had been a really tough life under German rule for those years. And shortly after that liberation, this was the first family to be liberated in Nazi-occupied France, the first building to be liberated. That family, they went out into their garden where they had stashed their alcohol. They had buried all of their alcohol. They didn't want the Germans to get hold of that. They took out the best bottle of champagne they could find and they toasted to those British airborne troops who had liberated them. And Camilla, this is one of my favourite stories of D-Day because it is so unknown, but that child in that basement who was cowering away behind the barrels is now known as Madame Arlette. And she, to this very day, that tiny child 80 years ago, still hosts veterans in Café Gondry every single D-Day anniversary. And tonight, Madame Arlette will be in Café Gondry with veterans. There are not many left now, very sadly, but Madame Arlette will be there at around midnight tonight to toast to those veterans with a bottle of champagne. And then after that, there will be a very moving ceremony where British paratroopers, serving paratroopers, will walk silently across this bridge, just as the men before them did so 80 years ago. So it is going to be a really moving night of events here, Camilla, and also a celebration of liberation.
Ellie, what I love about the scene that's unfolding there on Pegasus Bridge is not just that the sun is shining. We had similar conditions in Portsmouth, and it really did enhance this astonishing display of sort of military pomp and pageantry. But it's also just how many people are there. You spoke to those lovely kids yesterday who were in Normandy remembering veterans. You've got cross-generations here. I can see in the background men, women, children. So this anniversary, I mean, let's be honest, Ellie, this is the last time some of these veterans will be able to mark such a milestone anniversary. So good to see so many people there.
It is really heartwarming, Camilla, to see just so many people from all around the world, cross generations, coming here to mark what happened here, the bravery and the courage shown by that great generation, which, as you say, is dwindling out. I had the great honour of speaking to veterans earlier on today, and they noted that this was probably the last major event, the major anniversary that they would be at. And it was such a sombre occasion in that Bayeux War Cemetery a little bit earlier on thousands upon thousands of white gravestones and reading the names and the ages of those men who fell, 18, 19, 20 years old. It was such a moving experience to be there and to speak to those veterans, and then to come here and to see the other side of the story, which is a story of joy. It is a story of freedom. It is the story of liberation, and it began here. It began in Café Gondry 80 years ago tonight at midnight, and that is where France was liberated, Western Europe was liberated, and this is the start of the end of the Second World War.
Ellie Costello, thank you very much indeed, and we'll of course be following your reports tomorrow as the 80th anniversary kicks off very early in the morning. Thank you. Well, there's been tears before bedtime in the Welsh Senedd after Vaughan Gethin lost a confidence vote. More on that next. This is GB News, and we are Britain's election channel.
This vote may seem to be about the politicians and the media, but it's actually about you. We won't forget that.
Join us up and down the country as we follow every moment together.
More than ever, it's important to hear all sides
as you make your decision in the run-up to polling day.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's election channel.
Britain's newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
How can we have Britain's Got Talent? A British girl did win.
Yes.
This weekend.
Christmas, her name is.
Yes, Sydney Christmas.
Sydney Christmas.
She's a singer.
Yeah.
I'm guessing she's going to have a Christmas single out.
She's a cruise ship singer, and she works in a gym.
First woman to win in 9 years.
Yeah. I mean, I don't watch it anymore.
But some people clearly do. But apparently 5 of the last in the final were not British born or even live here.
Outrageous.
I know. And so why call it Britain's Got Talent?
I know.
It's bizarre, isn't it?
It sums up as well this difference between the British public and most people on the telly.
Yeah.
Because the judges do not notice this lack of British involvement in, or at least if they do notice it, they're not saying anything about it. But the viewers notice the imbalance, and just 4 of the foreign acts made it through to the final in the end. There was a patriotic protest in London on Saturdays, it was described. There was hundreds of thousands of people there. There were students against tyranny were there. There was Tommy Robinson was there, much maligned, divisive figure. But these people would say, we are feeling the need to walk on the streets of this country because we no longer feel we can assert our British identity.
Well, I mean, I think there's a difference between patriotism and xenophobia. And I think patriotism is great, and people like to feel a sense of identity, they feel a sense of belonging, you know, they understand what their flag is for, and they kind of, British values, which we all adhere to. And then there's xenophobia, which is sort of, we hate anyone who's not British. So I think I think that march that we saw at the weekend was actually quite patriotic. I don't think it was xenophobic at all. I think it was a nice sort of... They all seemed very kind of peaceful. And there wasn't any horrible rhetoric or anything like that. Certainly much less horrible rhetoric than we're used to seeing from the pro-Palestinian marches.
The People's Channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me. My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country.
That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Vote 2024 with me, Camilla Tominey. Extraordinary scenes unfolded in the Welsh Parliament this afternoon after Vaughan Gethin, the Welsh First Minister, lost a no-confidence vote. He lost it by 29 to 24. And as a result of that, he did get very tearful, had to be comforted by a colleague there. If you're watching GB News and not listening, he was crying and having to dab his face with a tissue. That was how upset he was. That was both before and after that no-confidence vote. It was tabled by the Welsh Tories on the back of 2 different claims. One, that he had accepted £200,000 from a business connected to environmental offences, in fact, convicted of environmental offences, and also because he was found to have deleted WhatsApp messages during COVID. This, however, was his reaction to the vote and losing the vote.
Today was an exercise in muck throwing. The range of different things that were said that members know are simply not true is really quite disgraceful. I'm going tonight to Normandy. I should have been in Portsmouth today honouring our D-Day veterans. I will go to Normandy to do my duty for my country, as any First Minister should. That means a long drive overnight to arrive to do the right thing tomorrow. That's how I feel about serving my country, and that's my intention now and for the future.
Well, Welsh Secretary David T.C. Davies joins me now. He's also the Conservative candidate for Monmouthshire. Mr. Davies, it seems as if Mr. Gethin has got no intention at all of standing down after this. He seems pretty angry in that clip there. What do you make of it all?
Well, first of all, these are not claims. Mr. Gethin accepted a £200,000 donation from a company whose director had been convicted twice of environmental offences. That isn't a claim, that is a fact. That is what happened. The other point which I think is relevant here is that that same company had received £400,000 in a loan from the Development Bank of Wales when Mr. Gethin was the minister responsible for the Development Bank of Wales. Now, it begs the question, if a company has to take £400,000 in a loan from a state-backed bank, and this was with the Welsh Government's own bank, why was it, if it was doing that, why was it in a position to then hand over £200,000 in cash as an electoral donation, a political donation for Mr. Gethin's leadership campaign? These are facts. They are not claims. And I don't see how Vaughan Gethin can claim to be a victim here. You know, the victims at the moment are the people who live around the Withybush waste site, who cannot open their windows and enjoy the summer weather that we're now starting to get because of the stink that is coming out of that site. These are the real victims in what's gone on here.
I mean, I suppose he's saying that he's a victim of a political assassination. He's only been in the job 12 weeks. And he says that the no confidence vote 29 to 27 is non-binding. He's not obliged to step down. He's right, isn't he?
Well, he's technically right that he is not obliged to step down, but I would have thought that it should be obvious that the writing is on the wall, because nobody believes that two of his own colleagues were unable to make it into the Senate because they were ill. You know, this is a vote of confidence, and the two people who claim to be unable to make it out of bed were two people with whom he's had significant differences of opinion. So, you know, we've been taken for fools here. He's lost the support of a majority of people in the Senate, and he should now do the right thing for Wales, and stand down. It is unacceptable. Not only that he had that money, took that money, but also there's still the issue of the deleted emails. Now, you know, we can't say exactly how they were deleted, but there is a post which appears to show Mr. Gethin advising everyone to delete their messages during COVID because of concerns about freedom of information requests.
All right. David T.C. Davies, thank you very much indeed for joining me this evening. Calling for Vaughan Gethin, very clearly there, to resign following that no-confidence vote. Let's move on now to an extraordinary survey which suggests that, would you believe, a majority of Britain's young people do not believe Israel should exist. This is a survey that has been conducted by Focal Data for Unheard, which is the news website. It surveyed 1,000 voters. 54% of 18 to 24-year-olds agreed with the statement that the State of Israel should not exist. This is the only, we could say, functioning democracy in the Middle East, ladies and gentlemen. Just 21% disagreed. In a separate question, young respondents were asked who was more to blame for the war in Gaza. Half blamed the Israeli government, while just a quarter answered Hamas. Only 19% responded all equally. Well, let's get the response from the editor of the Jewish Chronicle, Jake Wallace-Simons, who joins me now. Jake, what's your response to this survey?
Well, obviously, these are disturbing figures, and for me, they really throw into sharp relief the great cultural change that we're undergoing in our country, which is generational, whereby the values that older generations hold are being thrown out by the younger generations. This isn't really about Israel and Palestine. In fact, some extra polling done by Unheard established that they cared much more about Gaza than they did about wars closer to home in Ukraine. And so it's not really about the real place Israel. It's about their feelings about liberal democracy. about the norms of living in a Western society and the sorts of traditions and attitudes that we uphold. They're turning against those. When they march against Israel in the streets on a Saturday afternoon, they don't just march against Israel, they also attack statues of Winston Churchill and the Union flag and the cenotaph and the police. Israel is a symbol for the establishment in their eyes, for our liberal values of tolerance, openness, equality under the law and freedom of assembly and so forth. And it's that they don't like. It's that they're trying to bring down in the form of the only liberal democracy, functioning liberal democracy, as you said, in the Middle East.
Jake, do you put some of this down to social media? I mean, let's be honest, we've had conversations about this in the past, and we've agreed that Israel is not winning the social media war here. There's a huge amount of propaganda. I mean, we can call some of these students and campaigners useful idiots for Hamas if we want, but the point is that a lot of these algorithms seem to be pushing anti-Israel content. There's even been a suggestion, by the way, that TikTok, controlled by China, might be doing it on purpose.
That's right. I mean, this process of subversion of the West really started during the Cold War with the influence of Russian Soviet propaganda at the same time as the sexual revolution. And it sort of took root then in the universities and began to spread outward from there. But social media has given it rocket boosters. We live in an age now where young people don't have very much of an attention span because of the influence of social media, read far fewer books than they used to. Even politicians don't speak in paragraphs anymore, let alone sentences. And so their attention span is reducing, and their susceptibility to misinformation spread by our hostile actors and our enemies on social media is really quite worrying. And that's really exemplified in one aspect of the polling, which showed that 50% of them blamed the government of Israel for the war.
Yes.
They have no idea how it started.
No, maybe we need to do more in our national curriculum, Jake, to educate some of these young people about the actual history of this very, very complicated region and nuanced argument. But thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening. Well, coming up next is State of the Nation with Tom Harwood, who joins me now. What's coming up on the show, Tom?
Well, Camilla, on the day that tax has taken centre stage, I've sat down with a Treasury Minister, Bim Afalami.
Great.
Because we've really got to get to the core of what's going on here. Who's costing who, and really, who do we trust? Because at the core of these costings arguments and these tax arguments is a question of trust. But it's not just that. We'll, of course, be back with Ellie Costello on the other side of the channel as those D-Day commemorations approach and go on, as well as talking through the history of D-Day with Tessa Dunlop, the historian. Not just that as well, we're talking political violence with a journalist, who has been the subject of political violence in the past. Is it something we should be more worried about?
Jam-packed show. Great to have got Bim on the numbers, crunching the maths. I will, as ever, be back tomorrow at 7 p.m. with Vote 2024. Of course, you must stay tuned to watch Tom. But first, here's the weather with Annie Shuttleworth.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, welcome to your latest GB News weather update from the Met Office. Tomorrow's going to be another fairly cool day across the northwest with a risk of some further heavy showers, and we could see some further heavy showers this evening with a northwesterly wind pushing showers into similar areas. It's northwestern Scotland where we're going to see the highest rainfall totals. Through the next 24 hours or so, we could see a mix of hail, possibly some hill snow in there as well. We could also see some showers as far south as southwestern England overnight tonight. Many western areas seeing a bit more in the way of cloud tonight compared to last night. So it will be a bit of a milder night for some of us, but I think still where skies stay the clearest, there's a risk of a rural grass frost. So potentially another chilly start for some areas, particularly across eastern Scotland, where it will be a bright start to the day, plenty of early sunshine. But notice we've got some bright colours on those showers, showing the heaviness of them through tomorrow morning. We could see some spray on the roads because of that across western areas of Scotland, in towards northwestern England, as well as parts of Wales. The Midlands as well, potentially seeing some fairly heavy showers, but most of us getting away with a dry and bright start despite the chillier feel to things at the moment. So another fairly cool day to come tomorrow, especially for the time of year, and if you are further north and west, where it will be another showery day. There's another risk of thunderstorms, potentially some hail as well in those showers, especially as we head in towards Thursday evening here. Elsewhere across Wales, central areas of England and across the south coast in particular, they still feel fairly pleasant in the sunshine, highs of 18, possibly 19 degrees, so that's not too bad for the time of year. Now into Friday, we start to see a band of more persistent rain push across the UK, so that will bring a greater risk of some showery outbreaks of rain a bit more widely across the UK. So a bit more in the way of cloud, and it will still be another fairly cool day. But looking ahead to the weekend, it does look like there's been more in the way of sunshine more widely across the country, and temperatures returning to the low 20s for some of us.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
We've got summer sewn up with an incredible trio of treats, and you could win them. First, there's a fabulous £15,000 in tax-free cash to ensure this summer is special. What would you spend that on? Next, you'll also receive the latest iPhone 15 and a set of Apple AirPods. And finally, £500 to spend at your favourite UK attraction. Fun in the sun could be on us. For a chance to win the iPhone, treats and £15,000 cash, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or post your name and number to GB06 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 28th of June. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akweer, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
It's true. You're not wrong. No one will be cancelled.
Lovely. Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following